I did not plan to fall in love with a room that smelled like vanilla and warm butter. I walked in because my calendar said I needed something gentle, something that looked like care without asking hard questions. My friends called it a hobby, a harmless class to break the routine, a way to stop thinking about guest lists and seating charts and the word forever that had begun to feel heavier than it should. I told myself I was here to learn how to make a tart that did not collapse, to pipe cream without trembling, to do something pretty with my hands. The truth waited behind that, patient and quiet, like an oven preheating in the background. The studio looked nothing like the glossy photos I had seen online. It was better. Long tables lined up in soft light, steel bowls stacked like moons, wooden spoons darkened by use. Jars of sugar and flour and cocoa powder stood at attention on a shelf, labeled by a tidy hand. Whisks hung on hooks that chimed when the door opened. The floor carried a dusting of white that no mop could entirely erase. On one side, a wall of ovens glowed with orange windows. On the other side, a sink large enough to bathe a dog waited for pans that would soon be smeared with chocolate. The room hummed with low voices and the clink of metal on metal. I had the strange sense of walking into a place that had been expecting me. My ring felt cool against my finger. I twisted it once and let my hand drop. There would be a dress. There would be flowers and a photographer who said chin up and shoulders back. My mother would cry. His father would give a toast about legacy and steadiness. We had chosen a venue with good light and a manager who said we would not notice the catering because good catering is invisible. I had agreed to all of it because agreement was a river that carried everyone downstream. I had forgotten that people drown in rivers when they stop swimming. A woman called for attention and the room settled. She wore a dark apron that tied neat at the waist. Her hair was pulled back with a few strands falling out, not messy but alive. She stood with the ease of someone who belonged in a kitchen, shoulders relaxed, chin lifted, eyes bright. When she smiled, the air shifted. It felt like someone opened a window. No one introduced her to me. She introduced herself to all of us at once, her voice smooth but warm, carrying without strain. Welcome. I am Ariana. Tonight we will make pâte sucrée and pastry cream. We will temper chocolate. We will burn nothing if we pay attention. We will burn something if we get distracted, and that will also teach us. We are here to enjoy the process, not only the result. Breathe. You are safe to try. She said the words without drama. They landed anyway. Safe to try. It sounded simple. It felt radical. She moved through the room with quick grace, checking burners, turning a knob, lifting a bowl to test weight. I watched the way her sleeves pushed up to mid-forearm, the way her fingers curled around a whisk, the way her mouth shaped the words when she named each tool. There was nothing intimate about it. It was instruction. It was clarity. And yet something in me sat up. We paired off. I ended up alone at a station near the center. A silver mixing bowl waited, cool and generous. The recipe card told me to cream butter with sugar until pale. Ariana passed behind me and stopped, not because of me, because of something else she had noticed, a scale that was off, a student cracking eggs too fast. I tried to act capable. I pressed the butter with a wooden spoon. It resisted. I kept going. A little sweat gathered at my hairline. My spoon clattered against the bowl. My shoulder tightened. Ariana appeared beside me as if she had heard the sound my spine made when I pushed too hard. She rested her palm on the table and leaned in slightly, not crowding, just near enough that I could catch the clean warmth of her skin and a hint of citrus and flour. Her eyes flicked to my hands and back to my face. Her lashes were dusted with a little flour, or maybe the light made them look that way. I blinked and tried to breathe. Let the butter soften under your spoon, she said, calm and practical. Do not fight it. Persuade it. Her hand did not close over mine. She did not take the spoon away. She tapped the rim of the bowl with one finger, as if to say, this is where the story lives, right here at the edge. I adjusted my grip. I worked more rhythm than force into the motion. The butter began to yield. Sugar joined like snow. The mixture turned creamy. When I glanced up, she nodded once, an acknowledgement that felt like a gift wrapped small but precise. "See," she said, "you are already listening." Listening to what? I wanted to ask. The butter. The sugar. The recipe. The part of me that had been whispering for months. It struck me that I had not listened to anything except expectations for a very long time. My throat tightened. I looked back down and kept stirring. We sifted flour. We added a pinch of salt that did not look like much but tasted like decisiveness. Ariana explained gluten and tenderness and patience. She described how dough rests and why it matters. She moved like a metronome set at human speed. No rush. No drag. I could have watched her roll pastry for hours. When my dough came together, it looked rough. Ariana slid a bench scraper across my station and scooped the shaggy clumps into a pile. She pressed the heel of her hand into the mound and pushed forward, smearing it into the counter in one confident stroke. The sound it made was soft and firm at once. She lifted the scraps with the scraper and folded them back, then repeated the motion a second time. She stepped aside and gestured for me to try. I copied the movement. The smear felt strange and intimate, like smoothing someone's wrinkled shirt before a photograph. The dough changed texture under my palm, less stubborn, more cohesive. I looked up without meaning to. Her eyes were right there, steady and kind. My chest warmed in a way that was not about ovens. We wrapped the dough. We chilled it. We started the pastry cream. Milk warmed in a pot. Vanilla pods released a perfume that did not ask permission. I whisked egg yolks with sugar until they lightened, then added cornstarch. Ariana's words came quiet beside me. "Whisk like you are drawing circles that get clearer, not bigger." I tried it. The mixture grew glossy and thick. She lifted the pot to temper the yolks. Steam rose. I heard a student laugh at the far table. A timer chimed. The whole room felt like a heartbeat. I do not know how many times I thought about the wedding during that hour. I lost count. A cake that would be cut with a silver knife. A kiss that would be watched by 100 people. The smile that would be expected of me. Each image floated in and dissolved under the weight of vanilla and motion. The ring against my skin felt like a small coin left in a pocket through too many wash cycles, smooth and unfamiliar. I told myself I was tired. I told myself the light was good in here and the music was considerate, and that is why everything seemed like a bomb. We poured the cream into a shallow tray and pressed plastic wrap onto the surface to prevent a skin. Ariana explained why skins happen. She joked gently about impatience. Her laughter held no sharp edges. When she reached to tidy a smear on my station, her fingers came close enough to graze the air of my hand. I did not step back. I also did not step forward. The not moving felt like a decision. We rolled the dough and fitted into tart rings. She taught us how to angle the knuckles to lift the edges, to keep the corner from tearing, to let gravity help instead of forcing the curve. She showed how to trim with a rolling pin so the cut looked clean instead of jagged. A student asked if beauty mattered when flavor was good. Ariana said yes, because care shows up in both. She was not strict. She believed in dignity. When my tart shells rested in the fridge, Ariana walked past with a tray of beans for blind baking. She stopped again, this time because she wanted to. She set the tray down and leaned on my table with both hands, elbows straight, shoulders squared, eyes level with mine. The fluorescent lights in the ceiling hummed. I could hear a faucet running and the punctuated noise of pans being set to dry. "What is your name?" she asked, even though it was already written on the roster. The question carried interest, not formality. "Selena," I said, glad my voice did not crack. "Selena," she repeated, as if tasting the syllables to place them correctly. "You work carefully. Do you cook at home?" "Sometimes," I said. "Mostly I follow directions." "I am good at following directions." The corner of her mouth lifted. "Following directions is useful. Knowing when to trust your senses is better." I swallowed and nodded. She waited, curious, but never prying. I touched the edge of my station with my fingertips. It felt cool and solid, like a truth you can lean on. Something in me wanted to spill everything, the certainty that had begun to crumble, The late nights when I stared at the ceiling and wondered why a life that looked right did not feel like it fit. The way his hand on my back never moved me the way a kitchen full of possibility did in the span of an hour. I said none of it. I asked about the tart shells instead. She answered with an attention that felt like shelter. We baked. We let the shells cool. We filled them with cream that had loosened to silk in the mixer. We arranged berries like small constellations, red and blue and glossy. The room smelled like summer even though the calendar said something else. Ariana moved from table to table, offering a tip here, a steadying word there, a better angle for a photograph, a quick fix for a cracked edge. When she reached mine, she paused longer than necessary. Her gaze slipped from the tart to me and back again. I held my breath and pretended to adjust a raspberry. Lovely, she said, and then softer, well done. It should not have mattered. It mattered. Not because I needed praise, but because it came from someone who did not flatter. I felt heat rise to my cheeks and gave myself permission to blame the ovens. Class ended the way good evenings do, with noise and thanks and people promising to return. Boxes closed. Coats found arms. Phones buzzed with rides arriving. I wiped my station until it squeaked. Ariana handed me a card with the next course schedule on one side and a quote about courage on the other. I almost laughed. Courage had felt like an abstract noun for other people. Tonight it had a scent and a texture and a pair of eyes that saw through distraction. See you next week, she said, easy as water pouring. Yes, I said before I could think of reasons not to, and then, because honesty needed practice, I want to learn how to temper chocolate without seizing. She smiled. You will. You are less afraid than you think. The door chimed behind me when I left. Night met me with the cool of a city that had already eaten dinner. I carried a tart that looked like a postcard and tasted like joy. I should have sent a photo to my fiancé. I should have texted something bright and simple. I walked instead, letting the streetlights blur into strands that looked like sugar pulled into threads. My phone stayed heavy and ignored in my bag. At home I set the tart on the counter and touched the ring again. I thought about hands that teach instead of command. I thought about the way my name sounded in another mouth, given back to me like something valuable. I cut a slice with care and placed it on a plate. The first bite made me close my eyes. Flavor flooded, not sweet alone, but balanced, a little salt, a little tang, cream that held its shape without arrogance. I took another bite and put the fork down so I would not eat too fast. Pleasure asked for attention. I gave it. I washed the plate and leaned on the sink. The kitchen clock ticked with patient indifference. A part of me reached for old explanations, for the safety of routine, for the promise that this was nothing more than a pleasant evening. Another part sat very still and listened to the echo of a voice that had said, breathe, you are safe to try. I was not ready to name anything. I was ready to return. I dried my hands on a towel and turned off the lights. In the dark, the outline of my life felt like a sketch waiting for color. I went to bed with the smell of vanilla in my hair and the memory of a steady gaze in my chest. Sleep did not come quickly. When it did, it brought a kitchen with warm windows and a woman who taught with her whole attention, and the simple miracle of butter giving way when you stop trying to conquer it and choose instead to understand. The following week arrived with the weight of anticipation pressing against my ribs. I told myself it was only another lesson, another chance to practice rolling pastry without tearing it, another evening away from conversations that felt scripted at home. Still, as I tied my apron and set out my mixing bowl, a current of restlessness thrummed inside me, the same nervous energy that made it hard to focus on anything else during the day. I was not alone in the room, but every time Ariana crossed my line of sight, it was as if the rest blurred at the edges. She opened the session with the same calm authority as before, outlining the steps for a sponge cake layered with cream. Her voice carried through the room like a ribbon weaving us together, steady and unforced. I tried to fix my attention on the recipe card in front of me, the measurements, the sequence, but my mind lingered on the cadence of her tone, the way it seemed to invite trust without demanding it. She moved through the tables, her presence unhurried yet alert, and I felt an irrational hope that she would pause near mine again. The butter softened more easily this time, and when I whisked the eggs into froth, I did it with confidence I had not owned before. Ariana stopped nearby, checking on another student, but her gaze flicked toward me, a fleeting acknowledgement that sent a flush across my chest. She did not correct me. She did not need to, but she let her eyes rest for an extra second, and it felt like approval carved from silence. We worked in stages, folding flour into the mixture, preparing pans, setting timers. She encouraged us to notice texture rather than chase perfection, to trust our senses rather than the clock. It was a philosophy, not just instruction, and it seeped into me with every stir of the spoon. I wanted to believe her, that listening to instinct mattered more than precision, that the body sometimes knew what the mind refused to admit. At one point, she leaned close to demonstrate how to test consistency, dipping a spoon into my bowl and letting the batter fall in a ribbon. Her shoulder brushed mine. The contact was light, nothing unusual in a crowded kitchen, yet I felt it like an imprint. She lifted the spoon, nodded, and said quietly, "Yes, that's it," as if the affirmation belonged to more than cake. My pulse stumbled, and I quickly busied myself with scraping the sides of the bowl, but the echo of her words stayed lodged in my chest. When the cake slid into the oven, the room relaxed into waiting. Students chatted, laughed softly, compared notes. I found myself wiping my station with unnecessary care, smoothing flour that had already been cleared. Ariana came to stand beside me, leaning one hip against the counter, folding her arms loosely. "Do you enjoy this?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. I hesitated. "I think I do. It feels different from everything else." "Different can be good," she said, her eyes catching mine. "Sometimes it shows us what we've been missing." I wanted to ask her what she meant, whether she spoke from experience, but another student called her name, and the moment dissolved. She pushed away from the counter with ease and walked off, leaving me to replay the exchange until the timer chimed. We assembled the cakes with cream and jam, stacking layers until they looked like small towers of celebration. Ariana guided us on how to spread the frosting with long, even strokes, her hand circling over mine once when I faltered. The knife steadied, the surface smoothed, and I realized I was holding my breath. Her warmth lingered even after she moved to the next station. Later, as the class ended and students boxed their creations, Ariana thanked everyone with that luminous smile that made people feel seen. I lingered again, slow to pack up, reluctant to leave the glow of the kitchen. She noticed, of course she did. She always noticed. "You're improving quickly," she said as she wiped down a counter. "Practice matters, but so does attention. You have both." The compliment startled me, not because it was generous, but because it felt so specific. She had been watching, not casually but intently. I met her eyes for a heartbeat, then looked away, murmuring thanks. She let the silence stretch just long enough to become something before picking up a cloth again. On the walk home, I carried the cake in a box tied with twine. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt restless, like a thread had been pulled loose somewhere inside me. My fiancé texted asking if I would bring dessert for dinner tomorrow. I typed a reply, something cheerful and simple, but the words looked hollow on the screen. I sent them anyway. The following class I arrived early, pretending it was because I wanted a good spot, but the truth sat heavier. I wanted to see her before the crowd filled the room, to watch the way she prepared without an audience. She was already there, arranging ingredients with methodical care, humming faintly under her breath. When she looked up and caught me standing in the doorway, she smiled, not the polite smile she gave a group, but one that curved slow and personal. "You're early," she said, teasing gently. "I thought I'd practice measuring," I replied, fumbling with my bag. "Or maybe you just like the quiet before everyone arrives," she offered. Her intuition unsettled me. I nodded, unsure how else to answer. She walked closer, placed a small bowl of almonds on my station, and said, "Toast these until fragrant, not burnt. Trust your nose." Then she turned back to her own work, leaving me with the task and the hum of her nearness. The almonds warmed, releasing a perfume that filled the room with sweetness. I stirred them carefully, alert for any sign of scorching. She glanced over her shoulder once, nodded as if satisfied, and I felt a rush of pride over something so small. It was ridiculous, yet undeniable. As the lesson unfolded, our exchanges grew more frequent, subtle but deliberate. She adjusted my piping bag, brushing against my fingers as she guided the motion. She leaned close to explain how to judge caramel by its scent, her breath warm against my temple. She laughed softly when I sprinkled sugar unevenly and reached over to show me a smoother hand. Each moment left me charged, alive, but also trembling with the effort to conceal it. The other students began to notice that she hovered near me more than necessary. I caught a few curious glances, whispers behind shoulders. Maybe I imagined it, maybe I didn't, but it made my cheeks burn. Still, I could not stop seeking her attention, could not stop leaning toward her whenever she drew close. At the end of that evening, as people gathered their boxes, she touched my arm lightly. "Stay a moment," she said, so soft I almost thought I misheard. My heart leapt. I stayed, pretending to adjust the lid of my container while the others filed out. When the room emptied, she walked over, drying her hands on a towel. She stood in front of me, close enough that I could see the flecks of flour at the edge of her hairline. "You're doing well," she said, then paused. "But I wonder if you believe that." The question pierced me. I swallowed, unable to answer. She searched my face, not impatient, just waiting. I looked away, fumbling for words, but none came. She let the silence stretch again, then finally gave a small smile. "Next week," she said simply, and stepped back. That night I carried home more than a cake. I carried a storm that grew louder every time I closed my eyes. My fiancé kissed my cheek distractedly as I set the box on the counter. He asked how class was. I answered with a wordless shrug, because no language I had belonged to what was happening. Later, as he scrolled his phone beside me, I stared at the ceiling and replayed every detail of Ariana's touch, her questions, her laughter, until sleep finally dragged me under. In the days that followed, I found myself drifting. Meetings blurred. Dinner conversations felt shallow. The ring on my hand grew heavier. But the memory of her voice saying, "Trust your senses," lifted me every time I let myself remember. It was not safe. It was not logical. But it was alive, and I wanted more. The message from Ariana arrived on a Thursday afternoon when the week already felt too heavy. She wrote simply that she was organizing a charity event at an orphanage, a baking day to bring treats and joy to the children, and she asked if I would be willing to join her. My hands trembled as I read the lines, though nothing about them was romantic or suggestive. They were practical, kind, and open-ended. Still, I could not deny how quickly I answered yes, not with hesitation, not with the practiced caution I had used so often in my daily life, but with the swiftness of someone who had been waiting for the invitation all along. When Saturday came, I found myself walking toward a small building tucked between narrow streets, a place painted in fading colors with flower pots at the windows. Laughter floated through the open door before I even stepped inside. Tables had been arranged with bowls, flour sacks, and trays of fruit. Children in mismatched clothes darted between volunteers, their voices rising in excited waves. In the center of the lively room stood Ariana, tying her apron as naturally as if this had been her kitchen since childhood. She spotted me almost instantly and raised her hand in greeting. The smile she gave was brighter than any candlelit moment in class. She walked over, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear as she said she was glad I came. The words were ordinary, but the warmth behind them set me at ease in a way I rarely felt around anyone else. She handed me a bowl of dough to knead and pointed toward a group of children waiting for guidance. The afternoon unfolded in cheerful chaos. Flour dusted the air like snow, laughter mixed with the rhythm of wooden spoons against bowls, and every surface soon carried the marks of sticky fingers. I worked beside a girl who could not have been more than 8, showing her how to press cookie cutters into rolled dough, her eyes sparkling at each perfect star she produced. Ariana moved from group to group, crouching down to speak at eye level, praising efforts, demonstrating with patience, her presence steady even in the whirlwind. At one point I glanced across the table and saw her lifting a boy onto a stool so he could reach the counter. She laughed as he dropped a handful of raisins into the bowl with dramatic flair, and for a moment I felt something twist inside me. It was not just admiration, though there was plenty of that. It was the realization of how deeply I wanted to be part of this world she created, one filled with gentleness and purpose, a world that felt more real than the scripted future waiting at home. Hours slipped by until trays of cookies and small cakes filled the tables. The children clapped as the first warm batches came out of the oven, the scent of sugar and spice wrapping the room in comfort. We distributed plates, helped pour drinks, and joined in the feast, watching crumbs scatter like confetti across happy faces. I could not remember the last time I had smiled without effort, but there I was, laughing at jokes told by children, stealing glances at Ariana as she brushed flour from her cheek with the back of her wrist. When the last crumbs had been eaten and the children were led off for evening activities, the room slowly emptied of noise. Volunteers trickled away, offering quick goodbyes. Soon the echo of footsteps faded and silence crept in. Only Ariana and I remained, surrounded by trays and bowls that needed washing. The sudden quiet made my pulse quicken. We began clearing the tables, stacking plates, soaking pans. The rhythm of cleanup was steady, yet beneath it was something charged. At the sink, our shoulders brushed as we reached for the same sponge. She laughed softly and let me take it, but her hand lingered a fraction longer than necessary against mine. I felt the spark immediately, sharp and undeniable. She set a tray aside and turned to face me fully. Her eyes carried the same calm as always, but tonight there was an intensity one had not seen before. She stepped closer, closing the space that had always existed between us in class. I froze, hands still damp from rinsing. "You don't need to hide what you feel," she said, her voice low but certain. I opened my mouth to respond, but words dissolved. She reached up and gently wiped a streak of flour from my cheek with her thumb, the simple gesture far more intimate than any embrace. My breath caught, the room around us shrinking to the space between her touch and my skin. Her hand did not fall away. Instead, she placed it lightly against my jaw, tilting my face so I could not look anywhere else. "Selena," she whispered, and hearing my name like that unraveled me. Every thought of duty, of rings and promises, crashed against the wave of desire that surged forward. I wanted to step back, to protect myself from what this meant, but my body leaned toward her before my mind could argue. The warmth of her palm anchored me as if she had been holding me all along. "You feel it too," she continued, not as a question, but as a certainty. My chest rose and fell too fast. I wanted to deny it, to cling to the safety of the life already mapped for me, yet my silence betrayed me. She saw everything in the way I failed to pull away. She leaned closer, close enough that I could see the faint freckles across her nose, close enough that her breath brushed against my lips. I trembled, torn between running and surrendering. "This is real," she said softly. "Don't pretend it isn't." Her words cut through the last defenses I had built. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again she was still there, unwavering. My hand rose almost against my will and rested on her wrist, holding her in place, not to stop her, but to keep her near. For a moment we stayed suspended, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Then she pulled back just slightly, enough to give me a choice. The restraint in that gesture undid me more than any kiss could. I whispered her name, barely audible, and she smiled, small but certain. She did not push further. She let the moment breathe, her hand slipping from my face, but trailing slowly until it reached my fingers. She laced them with hers, firm yet gentle, and that single touch sent a tremor through me more powerful than any embrace I had known. We finished cleaning in near silence, yet everything had changed. When the last pan was dried and the lights were dimmed, she walked me to the door. Outside, the streetlights flickered and the air smelled faintly of smoke from a nearby chimney. She stood close, her presence steady, her hand brushing mine again before she finally let go. "Thank you for today," she said, her tone layered with meaning that extended far beyond baking. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. The walk home felt endless, my thoughts spinning in circles I could not untangle. At my apartment, I stood in the doorway staring at the ring on my finger. It looked the same, yet nothing felt the same. Inside, my fiancé asked how the event went, his tone distracted, his eyes fixed on a screen. I answered with simple words, too simple, because the truth was too vast to share. That night, lying awake in the dark, I pressed my hand against my chest where Ariana's touch still lingered. The sound of children's laughter echoed in memory, but above all, it was her voice that stayed with me, the certainty in her eyes, the way she had stripped away my defenses with nothing more than truth. I realized then that I had crossed an invisible line. No kiss had sealed it, no promise had been made, yet something inside me had shifted permanently. I could not return to who I was before. The world had tilted, and in its new angle, one woman stood at the center, holding a light I could no longer look away from. The invitation arrived wrapped in gold, its lettering pressed into the paper with delicate curves that spoke of planning and expense. My fiancé had mentioned nothing about it, so when I opened the envelope and saw the words announcing an engagement celebration, my stomach tightened. It was described as a simple dinner, but I knew him well enough to understand nothing he arranged was ever simple. He liked control. He liked the appearance of elegance. He liked moments staged so that photographs could capture perfection. I read the card twice, then folded it shut as though closing it could stop time from moving forward. The evening arrived sooner than I was ready for. I dressed in a gown my mother had chosen, a pale shade that looked flattering under soft light. My hair had been styled by hands more skilled than mine, pinned and sprayed until it did not move. The mirror showed me a version of myself that looked appropriate, polished, expected. My chest, however, felt as if it were carrying a stone. The restaurant glowed with crystal chandeliers and polished wood, every surface reflecting a carefully curated atmosphere. Guests gathered with glasses in hand, speaking in tones that blended wealth with routine. Family members I had not seen in months greeted me warmly, their faces alight with anticipation. Friends hugged me and whispered congratulations as though the outcome had already been sealed. I smiled where I had to, I laughed when prompted, I nodded at stories repeated for the sake of tradition. The air grew heavy with expectation, though no one voiced it outright. My fiancé played host with ease, shaking hands, offering wine, guiding conversation as if the evening were a performance and he the conductor. I watched him from across the table, trying to find the warmth I once thought I loved. His suit fit perfectly, his tie was straight, his smile broad. He spoke of our shared future with the confidence of someone who never doubted the path ahead. And still, my heart beat elsewhere. I thought of flowers scattered across a table, of children's laughter rising like music, of a woman wiping a streak from my face with hands that carried both strength and tenderness. The memory returned again and again, piercing through the polished surface of this dinner. I gripped my napkin tighter, willing myself to hold still, to play my part without faltering. After the main course, the clinking of a spoon against a glass pulled attention to the center of the room. My fiancé stood with a calm grin, his eyes sweeping the crowd, his voice confident as he thanked everyone for coming. Then, as if rehearsed, he turned to me. Chairs scraped, phones lifted, conversations hushed. He lowered himself onto one knee. The box in his hand opened to reveal a ring brighter than the one already on my finger, its diamond catching the light in a way that demanded applause. He spoke of love, of years to come, of promises made and kept. His words were eloquent, his timing flawless. The room held its breath, waiting for mine. My chest tightened so fiercely I thought I might not find air. My gaze drifted over the expectant faces, each smile urging me toward the answer they assumed. I felt the weight of tradition pressing down, the momentum of a life built on decisions I had not truly chosen. My fiancé looked up at me, sure of the outcome, his hand extended, waiting for mine. And then, unbidden, Ariana's face rose in my mind. Her eyes steady, her voice quiet but firm, her words reminding me not to pretend. The memory of her hand in mine returned with such clarity that the restaurant seemed to blur. I felt again the electricity of that touch, the silent truth it carried. In that moment, I knew I could not say yes, not without erasing myself. The silence stretched too long. A murmur rippled through the guests. My fiancé's smile faltered, confusion flickering across his features. Tears blurred my vision, not from joy but from the pain of choosing honesty. My throat tightened, and with all the strength I could summon, I whispered, "I'm sorry. I can't." Gasps filled the air. Someone dropped a fork. My mother pressed a hand to her chest. My fiancé froze in place, disbelief etched into every line of his body. The ring in his hand sparkled cruelly under the lights. I shook my head, words tumbling from me in fragments, apologies that could not mend what had broken. He rose slowly, his expression shifting from shock to anger to something heavier, a grief that struck deeper than raised voices ever could. The guests shifted uncomfortably, whispers buzzing through the room. I felt every eye on me, but I could not take the words back. I placed my napkin on the table, my hands trembling as I stood. My legs felt weak, but I forced them to carry me out of the room. Conversations hushed as I passed. Some faces turned away in disapproval, others followed me with curiosity. The door closed behind me, shutting out the heavy silence. Outside, the night air hit like a wave of cold. I gasped, my breath sharp, my vision swimming. My chest felt both hollow and free. I leaned against the wall of the restaurant, trembling, knowing I had broken a path that could never be mended. My phone buzzed in my purse, surely messages piling in, but I could not bring myself to look. I walked instead. Streets blurred past as I tried to steady myself. My heart ached with guilt, yet beneath it was the undeniable truth that I had done the only thing possible. To have agreed would have been a betrayal of more than him. It would have been a betrayal of myself. By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion had set in. I closed the door behind me, slid down against it, and pressed my palms over my face. Images flooded my mind in fragments. The glittering ring, the shocked faces, the silence that followed my refusal. Yet through all of it, one presence stood clearer than the rest. Ariana, waiting somewhere beyond the wreckage, her words still echoing. That night I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hurt in my fiancé's face, the weight of disappointment in my family's stares. Yet the memory of Ariana's hand brushing mine glowed like a small flame in the darkness. It frightened me, how strong it was, how impossible to ignore. Morning came, harsh and gray, but I felt lighter. The burden of pretending had lifted, even if it left scars behind. I made coffee, sat at the table, and stared at the ring still circling my finger. Slowly, deliberately, I slipped it off and set it on the counter. The sound it made was sharp, final. I knew then that my life would not be the same. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with questions and judgment. But I also knew that honesty had finally broken through the surface, and once spoken, it could not be silenced again. The morning after the dinner felt strangely quiet. The apartment seemed emptied of air, each corner heavy with silence, each shadow carrying the echo of what I had done. I brewed coffee and barely touched it, my hands wrapped around the cup more for warmth than taste. My phone blinked with missed calls, messages stacked one on top of the other, names of relatives, friends, even coworkers who must have already heard. I stared at the screen, unable to respond, my chest tightening with every vibration. What I had done could not be undone, but it also could not be ignored. I had pulled the veil off a life that had never truly been mine, and now all that remained was the wreckage. Yet beneath the ache, beneath the fear, there was a thread of relief that wound steady through me, a truth I could not shake. For once I had chosen honesty, even if it cost me everything familiar. By midday, the walls felt too close, the rooms too suffocating. I grabbed my coat and left without a plan, my feet moving before my mind caught up. I found myself walking the familiar route toward the bakery school, though no class was scheduled that day. I did not know if Ariana would be there, but some part of me needed the possibility. When I reached the door, the windows glowed with afternoon light spilling across empty tables. Inside, the place was quiet, save for the hum of a refrigerator and the faint scrape of movement near the back. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Ariana emerged carrying a tray of cooling pastries, her hair tied loosely, a smudge of chocolate near her wrist. She looked up, startled, then softened into a smile that made my knees feel unsteady. "You're here," she said simply, as if she had been expecting me. I nodded, unable to summon more. My throat felt dry. She set the tray down, wiped her hands on her apron, and crossed the room. She did not press me with questions. She only studied my face with quiet patience, as though she could read the answer in the lines of my expression. "I couldn't do it," I whispered at last, the words breaking loose like stones from a wall. "I couldn't say yes." Her eyes flickered with something like sorrow and pride woven together. She reached for my hand, and I let her take it, the warmth of her skin steadying the chaos inside me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence did not feel empty this time. It felt like space being cleared for something new. She guided me to sit at one of the long tables, the scent of sugar and butter still clinging to the air. I tried to explain, halting and messy, about the celebration, the ring, the silence that had shattered into my refusal. My voice shook, but her gaze held steady, grounding me. When I faltered, she squeezed my fingers, reminding me without words that I did not need to apologize for finding truth. "You were brave," she said at last, her tone low but firm. "Even when it hurt, you chose yourself." Her certainty unraveled me more than the chaos of the previous night. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead into her shoulder, and she wrapped her arms around me without hesitation. For the first time in what felt like years, I allowed myself to cry without shame. She held me through it, her touch strong and gentle, her presence like an anchor. When I finally pulled back, the world seemed sharper, the air clearer. I looked at her and saw not just the woman who had guided my hands through dough and batter, but someone who had been quietly holding up a mirror to the person I had tried to hide. I felt raw, exposed, but also lighter. The days that followed were not easy. Whispers circled quickly, friends drifted, family called with voices sharp or pleading. Some tried to convince me I was making a mistake, that I was throwing away stability for confusion. Others turned cold, unable to understand. Each conversation left me drained, yet every evening when I thought of Ariana, strength returned. I would recall the way she had told me not to pretend, the way she had looked at me as if I mattered beyond appearances, and it reminded me why I had chosen this path. We began to see each other more, not in grand gestures, but in small rhythms that became essential. After classes ended, she would invite me to share tea in the quiet kitchen, and I would tell her about the noise of my days. Sometimes we walked through the city at night, the streets calmer, the glow of shop windows reflecting in puddles. We did not need constant words. The nearness was enough. One evening, as we sat in her apartment surrounded by plants and books, she asked softly, "Are you afraid?" "Yes," I admitted. "Every day. But it feels different from before. This fear doesn't hollow me out. It tells me I'm alive." She smiled then, a smile that reached her eyes, and leaned closer until her forehead rested against mine. Her breath brushed my lips as she whispered, "Then don't run from it." When our mouths met, the world narrowed to the heat of her kiss. The gentleness and hunger mingled together. It was not about urgency, but about recognition, about two people meeting where they were most themselves. My hands trembled as I held her, not from doubt, but from the enormity of finally letting go of everything I had suppressed. The kiss deepened, and I felt years of silence unravel inside me. The intimacy that followed was not about conquest, but about discovery. Every touch was a conversation, every sigh an answer. She moved with patience, guiding me into a space where fear softened into wonder. I had never felt so present, so unmasked. When we lay side by side afterward, the candlelight flickering across her skin, I realized I was breathing without effort for the first time in years. Morning light spilled across the room, soft and golden, and I woke with my head on her chest, her heartbeat steady beneath my ear. She stirred, stroked my hair, and asked how I felt. I admitted the truth, that I was terrified, but also whole. She kissed my forehead and told me that was enough. Time began to weave us together in ways I had not anticipated. I left clothes at her place, then books, then small pieces of myself I had never shared before. We cooked together, shared silence on rainy afternoons, laughed over spilled flour as if it were confetti. The outside world was not always kind. Some stares on the street lingered too long, family dinners turned tense, and questions came heavy with judgment. But every time I looked at her, every time her fingers tightened around mine, the noise fell away. One night, as we lay on her couch listening to music from an old record player, she asked if I regretted it. I turned to her and answered with clarity I had never felt before. No. It was the hardest choice I have ever made, but it was also the truest. I don't regret finding myself. I don't regret finding you. Her eyes shimmered, and she kissed me softly, as though sealing a promise neither of us needed to speak aloud. Months passed, and the word partner became natural on my tongue. I introduced her not as a friend, but as the person who stood beside me in every sense. Each time I said it, the weight lessened, replaced by pride. I no longer hid behind rehearsed smiles. I lived as myself, even when it drew whispers, because the alternative was no longer imaginable. 1 year after the night I had refused the proposal, I found myself standing in her kitchen, surrounded by the life we had built together. The woman who once sat in a restaurant choking on silence felt like a ghost. The woman I had become was someone new, someone whole. Ariana reached for my hand, her touch warm and grounding, and asked quietly, "Would you do it all again?" I leaned into her, my heart steady this time. "Every moment," I said. "Because with you, I finally know who I am." In that quiet space, surrounded by love that had grown out of fear and doubt, I understood that the journey had been worth every tear, every confrontation, every loss. What mattered was this, the freedom of living truthfully, the peace of finally belonging to myself, and the joy of finding someone who saw me clearly and loved me as I was. Love is rarely simple, and honesty often arrives carrying both freedom and loss. Selena's journey showed us how courage can mean walking away from a life that everyone else approved of, only to step into a love that no one expected. It was not the easy path, but it was the authentic one, and in choosing Ariana, she chose herself. That is the heart of every story we share here, the reminder that truth is worth the risk, even when it breaks what seemed unbreakable. Maybe you have faced a moment like hers, standing at the edge of two futures, one paved with certainty and the other filled with unknowns. It is terrifying to walk away from comfort, yet it is even harder to live without your own heartbeat guiding you. Selena discovered that fear does not mean you are wrong, it means the choice matters. If this story touched you, take a moment to reflect on the choices you are making in your own life, the ones that may be pulling you closer to or further from who you really are. And remember, every time you live with honesty, you create space for love that feels true. You are watching She and She.